Hi there, I'm Ali Board and I am the author of A Beginner's Guide to Watercolour with Mixed Media, published by the fantastic Search Press. Now, I made a little visit to the Search Press offices recently, and they have invited me to do a short little tutorial to get you started in the world of mixed media. Lots of experimentation, and I'm hoping that you will follow along and create your own version of my piece. Now, I don't know about you, but I am a sucker for art materials. Now, this isn't always a bad thing, particularly if you like to experiment. Now, what I've done for this, I've decided that I'd really enjoy going back to a subject matter that I have painted and drawn quite a lot, which is a poppy seed head. And rather than do lots of planning with regard to what materials I'm going to use and how it's going to manifest itself on the paper, what I've done is pick some materials out. I've got them scattered around my desk. And then what I'm going to do is I'm not going to make too many decisions about it. I'm not going to make a kind of list of all the things that I'm going to do in the order that I'm going to do it. I am just going to respond to what happens on the piece of paper in front of me. Now I'm going to start with the piece of paper. This is a handmade piece of watercolour paper. There's lots of different surfaces that you can choose when you are painting in watercolour or some sort of lightweight water-based media. That could be ink, it could be gouache, it could be all sorts of things. And for this demonstration, I really don't want you to think that you've got to have very expensive materials either. Just pull things that you fancy using, that pencil that you've never really had a play with, that piece of paper that was given to you as a gift, and just test things out. Don't set too high an expectation. Let's just see what happens. I can promise you that I have not done any more planning than what you see here right now. Now, because my poppy seed head, I was having a look at this just before I pressed record, because my poppy seed head is long and thin, and I don't really want to mess around with doing several of them today. I just fancy doing one and having a play around, keeping it nice and simple. Now, even if I draw this very large on my piece of paper, it doesn't really say tall, this piece of paper, does it? It's a sort of standard A4-ish size, which means that it's kind of one, let's just measure that distance, 1 to sort of 1.5, 1, and maybe just a little bit over 1.5 in its composition, but that doesn't say long and thin to me. So I think one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to change the dynamics of my piece of paper by folding it in half and then just using what I would call a pillar box style of piece of paper. Now, I could measure it really accurately, and if that's the sort of thing that you gravitate towards, then that's what you must do. I like to think a little more freeform than that, and so I'm going to fold it in half, and then rather than cut it with a pair of scissors, I'm going to see if I can tear it down the middle, because it's got this delicious edge which is called a deckle edge, D-E-C-K-L-E, a deckle edge. So let's move my poppy seed head out of the way. And just in case you're wondering what these are, I have a board that is on a slight angle, both so it's easy for me to see, doesn't put any strain on my back or my neck, and you can see it much more clearly in the camera. And then what I've done is I've actually attached a magnetic sheet. It was black and very dull and boring, so I covered it in a piece of sticky back transfer paper, and there you can see, look, you've got the handle of the board, and just to make it look a little more attractive. And so what these things are, they are called magnetic push pins. You can see there's the magnet there, and then rather than taping my board or my paper, sorry, or anything else to it, there you go, you can see it's magnetic and it works much more easily. So the first thing I need to do to tear this, rather than try to do this at an angle, is that I'm going to drop my board down flat so that it's a touch more sturdy. So we'll take that piece of paper and we'll see if we can fold it. Now, this is a very heavyweight piece of paper, so it's going to be quite a challenge to get it folded in half. But let's do it loosely to start with, and then apply a bit of pressure on that fold to see if we can get a more interesting shape. Already that looks more like what I had in mind for my poppy seed head. So if we're going to tear it, we don't really want to fold it once. We want to fold it several times to kind of break down the integrity of the surface. And rather than me making some nasty marks, I'm going to reach over for my very fancy pair of scissors, where the handle of the scissors sometimes comes in very useful for creating a sharper fold. Now you do need to be careful with doing this when you run a pair of scissors, particularly on a piece of watercolour paper, because if you're not careful, the scissors can actually damage the surface. So a little pressure right on that crease. You can see already that the integrity of the watercolour paper is starting to go. It's starting to crack, and it's much easier to bend backwards and forwards. Let's do one more, shall we? Just to get that in. I can feel it crushing underneath the handles of my scissors. I think that's going to be all right. Let's put those away before I do myself a damage. And then at the top, let's see if we can break it and then tear it. So I'm holding one side down flat and I'm pulling the other side away. So we'll come down here with that. And now what I've got is two much more interesting pieces of watercolour paper. I don't think there's a lot to choose between them. Let's have a good look at them and see which one I like. I don't know why, but I think I prefer this one. So we'll go with that. Now that can live to fight another project, or it could possibly be my test piece of paper for when and if I need to test any materials out for this project. So there we've got a lovely piece of paper, much more in keeping with this poppy seed head. And I'm going to use my magnetic push pins just to hold it down to the surface. I don't like sticking my piece of watercolour paper down to the surface. I like to be able to pick it up, move it around, and if necessary, dry it from the back. So this is the system that I prefer to use. Let's start with a bit of drawing, shall we? Let's shift these things over ever so slightly, and let's have a look at this poppy seed head. It's made up of really distinctive parts. You've got the crown at the top, which actually, because of the angle of the camera, you can see far more clearly than I can. You've got these amazing chambers around the edge, which is where all the seeds are. And in actual fact, I noticed earlier there are still some seeds in this head. I may have to go and sprinkle those in my garden. Then you've got this kind of main body, not symmetrical at all. And you can see that it's almost gone like a sort of skeleton style where it has just rotted away. This is more like it would have been, and either the damp has got to it or something like that. Then you've got the neck of it here and this not particularly uniform stem. I think that's why I like poppy seed heads, because they're very asymmetrical and have quite a bit of character. Now I don't necessarily want to draw it the same, exactly the same proportions. I'm not going for a botanical style here. I'm going to hold it in my non-dominant hand and I'm going to twist it around until I get an interesting view of it. Don't forget, your view of it is slightly different because you're looking at it from here and I'm actually looking at it across. So what I draw isn't necessarily going to be the same as what you're seeing. So let's start to brush those poppy seeds away. Let's start off at the top. I think I want to make it bigger than it actually is. And I'm going to make the crown at the top like a sort of dish, like an oval. This, by the way, is just an ordinary graphite pencil. This happens to be a B grade. So that in pencils, the B stands for black and the H stands for hard. So the higher the number, the harder or the blacker they are. I like the one Goldilocks. I'll probably mention this a lot today. My preference for Goldilocks versions of things. Something that is not too hard and not too black or not too soft. So I particularly prefer a B. Now let's come in a little bit for that chamber. Coming around the neck, it kind of comes in a little bit. And then we've got, it comes around in that direction. I'm looking really hard to see how this poppy seed head is constructed. We'll maybe come back to those chambers in a second, but we'll see how we get on with those. But I don't like to rush too far ahead. Let's draw in with some more straight lines. You'll probably notice that I try to draw things in like a Morse code style, dots and dashes more than anything else. It kind of disappears a bit on that side. Looks a little bit like a chef's hat at the moment, but hopefully that won't last. Coming over here to the bottom of it, and then that neck is really thin by comparison, but it does taper in, goes out a little bit as it kind of comes round, goes back in again, and then now we've got this stem. I'm going to put this in lightly first because I want the stem to be a little bit on the quirky side, so that, as we saw, you've got this lovely kink in it down here. So let's pop that in with a bit of a twist, a bit of a spiral. I think maybe I've gone down a bit too low. Let's get my putty eraser out. And I've got two erasers here. I wasn't entirely sure which one I was going to need. So in erasers, a plastic eraser, this one is shaped a little bit like a pen. So you click it down, you might have a little block plastic eraser. This one is very, very fine, so that if I need to erase with any kind of detail, I can get into the nooks and crannies. But actually, I personally prefer a putty eraser. And a putty eraser isn't necessarily designed to rub out. See, mine is what's known as a kneadable putty eraser. It's more designed to kind of pick the graphite or any marks off the paper. And so I think I'll shorten this stem a bit because I've got a bit of a distance up here. So I want something similar down below. Let's shorten it on that side. That's better. A bit quirkier and kind of fits in my piece of paper. I'm very keen for the edges of my lovely piece of watercolour paper to form part of the composition. So let's go back up to the top again then, and let's have a really good look. Now the centre of that poppy seed head is kind of closer to this edge than this edge because of the angle that I'm looking at. And then we've got these, I'm not very good at bits of plant, but we'll call it the crown because that's what it seems to be to me. We've got this amazing pattern that happens where it kind of goes in and out, which tops it off. We've got radiating lines. I don't think I necessarily want to put them all in, but that will do for the time being. And then underneath, of course, we can see the underside of these. So we'll make a bit more of that edge. And then we've got these amazing chambers. And they look like arched windows, each one of them. They're really seriously cool. So we'll kind of simulate that by putting some of those in again. We don't necessarily need them to be fantastically accurate. We just want to give that sense of how our poppy is constructed. I think I'm probably going to want to make those really nice and dark later on. And then coming around here, you've got almost like a flap where they peel away, sort of triangular like. So we'll get that in. In fact, we'll get it in as a sort of pattern. Make some interesting marks around there. And then it sort of disappears around the corner a little bit. Then we've got, now which side do I like? I think probably my paint is going to dictate which side I like, but we'll see what happens. Got some, each one of those would be a chamber. You can almost see it here where those lines are coming down, and that can kind of help you construct your poppy seed head. If you take them from the top, make them come down and around and into these sections. Can you see now it's got that sort of balloon quality to it, which I don't, again, I don't need to do all of them, just let's hint at some. And we'll come in here, we'll make that line a bit stronger. Now what are we going to do down here? Now it's got this funny little addition, which I'm not sure that it does anything, whatever that is sticking out, so I'm going to leave that out. Let's make more of this neck. I want it to look kind of old and crispy, like it's the kind of texture that it is. And then when I think I'm good with all of that, let's join that stem up. I did a pretty good job of the shape of it before. And I'm going to finish it with one side being longer than the other. If you make them the same length as they come down, it will look very chopped off. And I just want it to, like I said, have a bit of space at the top and bottom, but to not really have to worry too much about what's going on there. So let's have a really good look at it, see if I need to put anything or take anything out. I think I could possibly do with tidying up some of these areas, like the bits in between the crown. When I start throwing paint at it, I really don't think it's going to matter an awful lot. This paper is very textured, so where I'm erasing, it's really holding on to the bits of rubber. Let's give that a good old clean and tidy up in there. Come away. And then I think for the time being, we will call the drawing part of the poppy seed head complete. Now I like to use watercolour as the kind of main component of my paintings. I've tried all sorts of media, and whilst I do dip into others on occasion, I use pastel and gouache and all sorts of other things. Watercolour is usually the place I start because it is both predictable and unpredictable. I love the fact that I know it's going to give me a nice, light, ethereal kind of quality, but I don't know where it's going to run. And if I make it really wet and really sloshy, it's going to make some interesting marks. And I also love it because it was kind of my first love, really, watercolour. I started off, I taught myself to paint in gouache, but actually watercolour is the thing that I kind of gravitate back to all the time. And actually, if you've really got some watercolour skills under your belt, those skills are going to be transferable to pretty much any medium. I had a good look at this and I was thinking, what do I want to do with the colour? Do I want to make just a tiny little background? Because I'm going to start at the back and work my way to the front. Do I want to start off just putting a little bit of colour and we could work on the poppy seed head? Or do I want to really go to town on this and see what I can come up with? And because I want to encourage you to be experimental, I'm going to choose option B. I'm really going to go to town on this. So that means I want to be able to throw colour at this piece of paper. And when I say throw, I'm not exaggerating. And if I have my little magnetic push pins on here, those are going to get in the way of my colour. So I'm going to show you another trick. Because I want to paint on this and I don't want any tape or anything to get in the way, I'm actually going to use some, this is framers tape, similar to masking tape, just not quite so sticky. I'm going to use my framers tape doubled over, almost like a piece of double-sided. And I'm going to pop those on the back. It probably won't slip anywhere, but I know me when I get started and paint starts flying and I can't stop myself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that like a bit of double-sided and lay it down like that so that I can put my colour on and nothing's going to get in the way. Let's stick those push pins over to one side. My board is determined to slip today. And I think one of the first things I can do is choose a colour palette. Choose colours that I feel inspired to use today. So here is one of my many watercolour boxes. I do have lots of them. This is my kind of everyday watercolour box. Obviously really messy, but you might notice something odd about it. These are called pans, these little plastic boxes. And again, I'm going to talk about Goldilocks. Now, when watercolour paint comes in a pan that looks like it's baked, you may have seen those squares that you can get quite hard. I find that quite frustrating because I can't get enough colour off the surface to do what I want it to do. But when I use colour squeezed out of a tube, because that is the other way that watercolour is presented, I find that consistency to be too sticky. It doesn't do what I want it to do on my brush. So I go for the Goldilocks version. I squeeze my colour out into my pans and then I allow it to dry. and you'll see that the way that I load my brush and apply it on the piece of paper, it just works for me. You do whatever you think is going to work for you. This is just the way that I like to do it. Now, to get those started, I'm going to give them a spray. I've got two colours here. I've got cobalt turquoise at the top, and then I've got a colour here called Moon Glow. It's a sort of like a dusky purple, and it's kind of, I think, going to sum up my mood for painting this seed head. I think. I'm not sure. I don't know where this is going, I promise you. And I've got a pot of water. I've got a palette here, which I don't actually need at the moment. I'm going to set that to one side so that I've got plenty of room for everything. I've got a spray bottle. I've got a nice, what I call my sloshy brush. This is going to be a brush that I don't have a lot of control over. It's going to put some colour down on my piece of paper, and I'm going to let it do its thing. And I have my security blanket, my piece of scrunched up kitchen roll. That's going to be the thing that I'm hoping will mop stuff up, or if I really don't like it, I can lift some of the colour off the surface. So lots of things ready to go, and I'm going to start by giving my watercolour paper a bit of a spritz, just in a sort of elongated horseshoe shape. What would that be? A kind of, I don't know, like a sort of nail or a staple kind of shape. I want it to run. You can probably see there's puddles of water occurring already. I'm going to take my brush. I'm going to start with the cobalt turquoise, just because that's a slightly paler colour. It's still quite strong, but it is paler of the two. And can you see I roll my brush in the colour, so all of the brush gets coated. I don't just tap away at it like this. I roll it in that colour. And what I'm going to do is, including the edge of my piece of paper, because I said, didn't I, that I was interested in making the edge of my paper being a feature of this painting, I'm going to add some colour into this and let it run down the page. In fact, I'm going to actively encourage it to run down the page so that I get some interesting marks. While I'm here, I'm going to load it up with colour, and over my hand I'm going to spatter a bit of colour. Be careful with things that are around you. I've obviously got all my technology here at the moment, so that will get a spattering of cobalt turquoise too. Look at that, getting some interesting marks. Then I'm going to go in with the Moon Glow, and that's because it needs a bit of a refill. I can push my brush in that a bit harder. Already getting some rather delightful marks. Let's add some of that Moon Glow up in here. Don't know what's going to happen with this. We'll see. Look at that. It's all actually running into my lap, which isn't what I anticipated, but that's no bad thing. Let's tint the edges of this bit of paper so that we've got something interesting going on. I think we're going to need something darker down here. Let's just get it running down the page a little bit, and we'll encourage it. Let's give it a bit of water at the bottom, and I think that's going to be okay for the time being. I don't think my lap is ever going to be quite the same again. And I'm going to take my piece of kitchen roll, and just here and there I'm going to soften the effect. Now, because this is a handmade piece of watercolour paper, it's not going to lift off as much as some of your more traditional watercolour papers. Experiment with this part of the process, because you'll find that some papers you'll literally lift all the colour off. It depends on the colour that you use as well, but do some experimenting, and don't be too surprised by anything. Now I'm going to push my luck a little bit with this. Technically you really shouldn't go back in and add more paint or water to it, but I've lost some of the spatter. So I'm going to go back in with the Moon Glow. That's better. So you can see what lovely dynamic marks I'm getting out of this. And then over here, that's a bit wet, my brush at the moment. I'm going to be in trouble if I put a brush that's that wet back into my picture. Maybe it does need to be a bit wetter. And then again, let's do a spatter over the top of a pencil. So I've got my pencil in my non-dominant hand, and I'm using my brush and I'm tapping it over the top. I'm not hitting it, because then the little particles of paint will jump up, and I don't want them to do that. I want them to go downwards at the piece of paper. I think that's going to be okay for what I want for the time being. Again, I don't really know how this is going to go together. Let's have a bit of a clean up. And what I will do, I'm going to start drying this. I use a craft heat gun to do my drying. Let's unravel it and show you. This is quite an old one now. Just something that you might use for embossing if you're into card making. I actually prefer it to a hairdryer, but if a hairdryer is all you've got, then that's absolutely fine. I just use it like this because it's not quite so noisy for me, particularly when I'm recording. So it doesn't do a different job just from a technical point of view. So let's give it a dry and we'll come back together in just a moment and see what we've got. That part of the process always takes longer than I think. And if I was a more patient person, then I might just leave it to dry naturally overnight. But as I'm recording this for you, I can't afford to be that patient, and secretly I'm not anyway. So you can see that I do tend to give my paper a little bit of a waggle to get it back flat again. It's possibly not as dry as I would like it to be, but actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to anchor it back down with my push pins, and I'm actually going to now let it go cold because I don't want to be painting back into it while it's warm, because that is going to make my paint or whatever it is I use next dry a little bit too quickly. So I'll wait for the temperature to go out of it and we'll come back together in a moment. I've let it go cold now, and actually it's flattened back out really beautifully. Now I have the dilemma about where do I go next with this? What do I do with this next? And I've got a few things which you can't necessarily see. I've got some extra paints and I've got a few pencils and crayons and things around. But I was having a think and thinking that it might be nice to introduce a rather more free-form technique to you. And you can probably see already that this is going to be my tool of choice. This is a bamboo skewer. This is one of those things that when you go to fancy parties and you get some nice appetizers, they sometimes come skewered with one of these. You could use a cocktail stick. You could use a barbecue skewer, you know, like a kebab skewer. I just happen to have a glut of these, and I like them because they've got a fine point on them, but you can kind of use them on the edge to make different marks. But maybe you've got something stronger. You could even use a stick out of your garden and whittle it to a point. I've taken the knot out of it because I find that the knot gets in the way, because I like to hold things on the end. But just do whatever feels comfortable. And I'm going to use it to actually draw back into this with some ink. And I'm going to introduce you to one of my favourite inks that is actually quite simple to use and to find. This might be a name that you know. This is Parker. So this is a really old-fashioned fountain pen company. And this is their black fountain pen ink, sometimes also called Quink ink, Q-U-I-N-K. Now this is black. I've used blue and I've used blue black and all sorts of things in the past, but I thought I'd go for black today. And what's special about this ink is that when you've drawn with it, it's very soluble to water. So I think I'm going to be able to create some interesting effects with this if I draw with it and my bamboo skewer, and then I'll get some kind of nice marks made, and then maybe I will go back in with some water and move some of those lines around. Now you might want to practice this first if you haven't had a go with this before, because it does feel rather odd and a little bit different. So I'm going to use the tip of that skewer to go back in. Now you can't be accurate with this, you just can't. So you sort of have to make your peace with the fact that it's not possibly going to look like you anticipate. Now I love the idea of that. I love the idea that I've got very little control over it, that it's going to make some really quirky marks. You can see I've got a quirky mark there already. If that is the sort of thing that makes you think, oh crikey Ali, I really don't think I can handle that, then use a waterproof sketching pen, or use something else, or a dip pen with a metal nib. It really doesn't matter. What matters more is that you feel comfortable with the marks that it's making on the piece of paper. Now, because I love the fact that I can't control these marks, I can, they're all right, but I've got a few, you can see I've already flicked a bit of ink across. But you see, I love all of that part of it. I like to create marks that are quirky and kind of show up like handwriting almost. And then that way I don't get too precise, because that's my downfall with painting. I get all prissy about it. I get my nose a few inches away from the surface, and then I'm disappointed because it's too neat and tidy. And I like it to have a quirky element to it. I still want it to look like the thing. I still want it to look like a poppy seed head, but I don't want it to look like a botanical style. That's not me at all. I want it to look like my poppy seed head. And so what I try to do is trip myself up, put things in my own way to create shapes and marks and personality on the piece of paper that I have little control over. So it looks quite scratchy, doesn't it? Which I don't dislike. And let's get down to the neck part of it. We'll put that in, using the sort of edge of it to get some shading. That looks rather delicious. This is quite a rough paper as well, so the end of the skewer is kind of flicking, it's getting caught in the fibres, but again, I like that part of it. And then we'll come down in here into the neck of it. I think I'm going to just have to change the way I hold this, because I do want this to have a certain amount of accuracy to get the stem in. I don't want it sort of veering off wildly. Let's use the edge. I thought I was going to have to change the way I hold it, but actually I think I was all right the first time. And oh yes, look at that. Kind of found a bit of ink on the edge. Running out a bit there. And maybe a bit lighter down here, but I don't want to overdo it. I don't want to steal focus from the top of this. Now, big question, do I leave it to dry, in which case it will be a little tougher to move, or do I go in straight away? And I think I've answered my own question. I'm going to go in straight away with my water, but I'm actually going to change my brush. This was my sloshy brush that I had very little control over when I was making marks. This one is a more traditional type of brush. This is an imitation sable brush, which means it's a nylon hair, but it has water and colour holding properties of a natural hair. But because it has a spring to it, you can see there, it's always going to come back to a more accurate point. Now this is a size 6, which is quite small for me. I usually prefer something bigger, and I'm wetting it and then going back in to see if I can shift some of this ink and get it to start moving around on my piece of paper, which I can. And I think I put the lid on that, but actually, do you know what? I might get a bit daring and go back in and actually pop some ink on the brush itself and maybe use it a bit like watercolour so that I get some shading out of it too. Oh, that's just rather delicious, isn't it? So coming down into that neck. I've lost a bit of shape up here, but that's okay. I think I can get that back. But can you see, you'll get different results on different paper as well. If you've got a more traditional watercolour paper, you may find that this runs like crazy on your paper. Because this is so absorbent, it's not moving as far as maybe I would normally anticipate. Now we're painting those chambers in to get it to look kind of dark and moody. Already I'm loving this. And let's get some of that ink to move. And then down here, I think again, oh, I could afford to put a little touch. Ooh, that's not a little touch, is it? That's a big touch. So we'll go with it. We'll use it to bring down the stem. Does this want anything else? I'm so tempted, you know, to, where should I go? Let's see if we can get some shading on some of the edges of this. Look at how delicious that is when it sort of spiderwebs its way across the piece of paper. And I think here, if I pick up a bit of that colour on my brush and bring it over here, then I don't recommend you do this with a very expensive brush. I can create some interesting patterns on there. Now, do I want to do anything else with this? I'm just having a think. Perhaps I want there to be a darker shadow underneath there so that that head really pops. I've lost a bit of my highlight there, but that's no bad thing. I think I want to go back to my skewer. Now the top of that's wet, so I don't know how this is going to work, but I was sort of thinking that I'd lost the lines coming into the middle a bit. Let's get some of those back in. That's better. I've lost a bit of shape as well to this, so I'm hatching a plan. Already my brain is thinking, ooh, but Ali, you could do this with it. So I'm really responding to what is in front of me. I'm not wild about that side of it. I'm wondering if I should have made that those chambers a bit wider. I can alter my drawing, that's all right, isn't it? I can do that. Let's bring that one over there. That's better. Balances it up a bit more. But what I need to do now, let's put the lid on the ink before I shoot it everywhere. What I need to do now is really dry that, because it will dry paler, and we'll come back together in a minute when that is dry and we'll see what we've got. This is all dry now, and it's really interesting. I've got some really delicious textures on there. There's some other things that potentially I want to do to it, but I was thinking I could do with reclaiming some of this. Now there's lots of ways that you can do that. I could go back in with a white jelly pen or a white pencil or a white Posca pen, something like that. But I thought this is too good an opportunity to not share another technique with you. Did you know that particularly with a black fountain pen ink, it responds really well to bleach? Now don't worry if bleach scares you. I'm actually going to suggest that you use this stuff, actually sterilising fluid, instead of bleach. It's not nearly so caustic. You don't have to worry about the fumes quite so much, although I would recommend that you work in a ventilated area. And you're going to be amazed by what it does to this ink. Now I need to bring my ceramic palette back in again, and I'm going to decant a little bit of this, let's just unscrew it, into that centre section. You're not going to need a lot at all, and then we can start to have a play. Now the first thing I'm going to do is clean off my bamboo skewer, because it is still covered in quink, and I'm going to dip that into the neat Milton, and I'm going to use that in a few fine lines which you might not necessarily see right at the beginning, to see if I can reclaim some of the paler areas between those kind of little archways that we were talking about earlier. Takes a little bit of time to work, but it does start to come back. So let's get that in there, and it also starts to create some rather interesting alternative colours. It will vary depending on your paper as to what other colours you get out of it. But let me show you in my little close-up camera exactly what's going on the piece of paper. So can you see in there, let's pull it down a little bit, can you see those lovely kind of smoky areas that are going on? That is the bleach. You can see that it's worked actually on the end of my bamboo skewer. It's starting to take the black away. Let's put it in that gap so you can see it start to work. It will lift some of the colour out, and what you get is these kind of amazing other marks going on, which I really rather love. Look at that one now, that's really lovely, isn't it? So we can start to, the more dilute your ink is, the more easily it will come away from the surface. So let's show you what I mean by that. This was ink with a bit of water in it, so you'll start to see where I draw in with my bamboo skewer. It's pulling that colour away. So that's rather delightful, isn't it? And down here on the neck, I've lost a bit of that texture. So let's pop it back in with our skewer. Can you see how that's starting to lift out? Isn't that exciting? Or is it just me that's easily pleased with these things? Let's pull some highlights out here. There's other things I can do with that, but there's something that I want to happen at the top. Let's go back to the overhead camera. And you can see, look at that now, starting to make some interesting 3D marks. Now I've lost the shape that's going on at the top because they've sort of all started to merge into one. Now Milton won't have any effect on watercolour because ink is usually a dye-based thing, so it will lift the colour out, whereas watercolour is a pigment-based thing. So what it means that you can do, you might want to use an old brush for this rather than your best painting brushes. I'm going to put a little bit of water, take some Milton, probably I suppose about 50-50 I would say, and then I can work back into the spaces between these shapes. Perhaps I might need it to, because of this soft paper, perhaps I need it to be a bit neater. I usually do this with diluted, but maybe I need it to be actually really quite strong Milton because of the surface. But anyway, can you see that it's starting to have an effect on the top now? So I'm starting to reclaim that shape again. And perhaps it needs some extra work, not denying that, but it's looking a bit healthier now. Definitely better with the undiluted, I think. So we'll get that going in there. Excuse me. And I think as well we'll pull a little bit of colour out down the stem so that it doesn't look so wholly different. Now again, I wouldn't recommend that you do this in an enclosed space. Work in a big area or work outside for this next bit. I'm going to load my brush up with that neat Milton, and again with a spatter technique I'm going to go back over the top of my poppy seed head and you'll start to see little dots occur. Let's go back into that close-up camera. Can you see you're getting some highlights, some little white specks or brown specks coming out? Let's put some down on the stem as well. It's not going to affect the watercolour, so it doesn't matter if you overspill. I think I've done too much up there, haven't I? So maybe I'm going to need to go back in with that later. In fact, this is me responding to what is happening on the piece of paper in front of me. I've just had an idea for something else that I might want to do. Let's mop this up just a touch, just because it will dry quicker, not because it's doing anything I don't want it to do. Let's go back in with the heat gun. We'll dry it in real time. Just watch those fumes when you're heating up the bleach. Let's go in there. And I think what I'm going to do now is a bit of negative painting. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, rather than painting the actual thing, I'm going to paint the spaces between. Because I've lost this shape at the top, let's give my brush a really good wash out. I don't really want it to have Milton. In fact, I'm going to move the Milton over to one side and just get my water pot back in. I'm going to take my darkest colour, which was that moon glow, and I'm going to work back in to kind of paint the background in around my shape. Do you see what I mean now? I'm going back in and I'm making the head of my poppy seed come together just a touch more because I have isolated it in the background. Now, because of the nature of this paper, I want to soften the edge of that colour so that it doesn't look too hard, which is going to be a challenge, but I think it's one I can meet. Let's extend that colour around. I'll show you in the main overhead camera in a minute the difference that this makes. I want to make sure that I don't get hard edges out of this, so I'm using lots of water to soften the surroundings, and maybe it gets a bit lost in places, but I don't think it's going to look, that's better, isn't it? I've kind of got that really nice hard shape, got a lovely lost edge there as well. Something I look for in my work an awful lot, something called lost and found edges. So by that I've got, can you see that's a very found edge? So it's very crisp, very hard. This is much more a lost edge where it's sort of disappearing into the background. And I think what I'll do, in fact, I'll switch brushes to my sloppy brush to get more of a shadow in on this side. So we're adding quite a bit of drama to it. Let's use the kitchen roll to soften that too. We'll fuzz this out a bit more, and then I think to stop it looking unbalanced, let's pull that colour down a bit further, and then we could go back in this side with some slightly richer colour, and then I'm hoping when I've done a few other things to it, maybe it will start to come together. Now let's switch back to the overhead camera so you can see the effect that that has had. Can you see what I mean? Putting a darker area in here means that it has come to life a little bit more. So let's mop that up, and I'm going to let this one dry naturally. I want it to kind of make its own way, to decide what it is that it wants to do, and we'll come back together in a minute and we'll think of some ideas for how to complete our poppy seed head. I'm really pleased with that, and I could leave it like that. I'd be very happy to put my signature on the bottom of that, but I'm wondering if I can push this forward even further. I might push it too far, but this is what experimentation is all about. I've already learned new things from throwing this at the piece of paper and seeing what happens. Now I'd like to introduce you to one of my favourite techniques, which is to go back in and to lift out colour, but in a slightly unusual way. Now if you are a crafter or you like any sort of interior decorating, then a stencil is not going to be unusual to you. I've got two here. I've got one which is a like a leaf and bud pattern, and I've got one which is a bit more random. Now you don't have to have fancy stencils to do this. You could use something like sequin waste, or you could even create your own with a hole punch and a sheet of plastic. It really doesn't matter. You might have these though, and they are useful not only for your crafting but for your fine art as well. And I like to find situations where I kind of cross the boundaries between those two disciplines, and this is certainly one of them. So I'm going to use a lifting out technique. I am going to have to be really careful on this paper because it's handmade, it's quite fragile. Again, like I said, if you've got a much more traditional watercolour paper, then you will actually find this easier rather than harder. And I have a bit of magic sponge. You might know of these. They're sometimes used for cleaning up tiling in your house. They are a legitimate tool in fine art. You don't have to have a magic sponge. A magic sponge will do this faster, but you actually can do it with a normal sponge and a bit more elbow grease. So what do? You take your magic sponge and you pop it in the water and you wring it out so that it is almost dry. In fact, a lot of the time what I do is actually wring it out in my piece of kitchen roll, because that way it takes the most of the moisture away. And then all I need to do is to decide what it is I want to lift out and where I want that to be. So I think I'm quite tempted over here, and what I'm going to do is very lightly stroke away at the surface. Like I said, I can't be too brutal with it because it is a very soft surfaced paper. But if I do a little bit of scrubbing, can you see I get this kind of ghost pattern going on in the background? And depending on the paper, depending on how much you scrub, depending on how wet you make it, you'll get variations of this. So let's move this one over to this side, and again, very light scrubbing, going backwards and forwards. That incidentally is a bit of sponge. It does happen if you're using a magic sponge. It does also lift the surface of the paper because this is a soft paper. Oops, stay there. But I'm not too worried about that. There's all sorts of things to be worried about, and that isn't one of them. So let's come down to this part and get that in, and then what I should get is this amazing kind of ghost image going on. But it doesn't have to be all negative. What I can do down here at the bottom is if I push this a little bit further, let's go for there, and then I've got quite a grubby bit of sponge anyway. Let's see if I pick up, oh, that's a bit too much water, a bit of water on there, and I go over to my paint and I dab it lightly in my paint, then I can also potentially, oh, I'm not getting my proportions very well today, go back in and actually add some positive colour to this rather than take it away. Can't quite get it, there we go, how I want it, that's better. Bits of sponge and bits of paper coming away. So can you see then I've got a sort of reverse ghost image come away. So quite subtle, quite things that you might want to do in the background. I always like doing it when my background, and that's not the case here, but if my background hasn't quite worked properly or if I've got the composition wrong. Now one thing I do want to do, I think let's tear that off. Let's treat myself to a little fresh bit of magic sponge. I have this one. I do love a dot, as you've probably seen in the texture, but I do love a dotty old pattern. And so let's, both on the seed head as well as the background, can you see I've got that nice transition? Now I have to really stop myself with this, because this is the sort of thing where I go, ooh, I could do this all over. Look at that. Isn't that fab? Let's go down here. I can probably only afford one more bit. Otherwise I'll be doing too much, but let's make it a slightly bigger bit and see how we get on. Yeah, again, look at that. So it's not really doing anything. It hasn't sort of added to it, but it potentially has made it more interesting. Now, what else could I do to this? I am itching, absolutely itching, to put some highlights on it. But I think before I put any highlights on it, I need to go back in and maybe just pull some elements together with a bit more detail. And for that, I'm going to use a good old-fashioned black sketching pen. Could be any colour that you like. I've used black ink, so I think that kind of makes more sense. And the bleach isn't going to affect this. So what I can do quite quickly, that's quite wet over there, but that's okay, isn't it? I can go back in and I can just tidy some of these elements up. I'm very keen that I don't start outlining things that I've spent a long time losing, but I can go back in and again back to that drawing. Maybe I outline some of the shapes so that they look slightly more deliberate. Maybe I go back in, give a bit more definition to something that didn't have it or has lost it. Maybe I go around, I've got a bit too much bleach in here, so maybe I'll add some nice details. And I've lost the edge of my stem, but rather than drawing where my pencil drawing was before, what I can do now is go back and actually go around the shapes that have occurred because of the way that I've used the ink. That is better, but I think I need one more thing, and that is some extreme highlight. For that, I'm going to be using some gouache. Now, gouache is like Tipp-Ex for watercolourists, A fabulous product. It's like very posh poster paint. It's quite opaque, and if you can afford to, spend a little bit of extra money on a really good quality one. It comes in a tube. You squeeze it out and use it. I prefer to use this, which is called a stacking palette or a tinting saucer, because I can actually mix it to the consistency that I want and always go back to it just by adding a bit of water. You remember that Goldilocks thing that I was talking about earlier? And what this is going to do is, I've got to use it judiciously, and I think this brush is going to be too big, so unusually for me, I'm going to go for a smaller brush. And I think to help you at home, the other thing I'm going to do is use the close-up camera, there we go, so that you can see where I'm putting it and why I'm putting it there. So this is a size 2 brush, again my imitation sable brush, and you will see me load all of the bristles up, and you will notice that I roll it in the colour so that it coats all of the bristles. Why do I do that? Why don't I just put the little tip in? I do it because I want there to be plenty of paint on here, so that when I go back in and I add my little touches of highlight here and there, I've got plenty on the brush that I don't keep having to go backwards and forwards. So this is the hard bit. How many highlights do you put in? And when do you stop? It's like a $1 million question. And I think the only way I can answer that is by pulling the experience card and saying, actually, do you know what? Put them in, and sometimes you'll get it spot on, and sometimes they'll be perfect, and sometimes you'll put in a few too many, or you won't put enough in. The good news about gouache, if I can just, where's my safety net gone, is that if you don't like it, you can just scrub it away and move it and put it in another place. So that's another reason for using gouache, say, over a paint marker or something like that. I think this adds really nicely to the textures that I've created. And actually, if I change the way that I hold my brush and drag them over the surface, then I'm hoping you can see we get some interesting textures forming over the top. Let's get a tiny highlight in there. Trouble with using a small brush is that it runs out of paint really quickly. Let's get a little highlighted edge along there so we see the difference, and a few more bits and pieces. I'm tempted, you know, to go back in to make a slightly thinner consistency of this, and maybe we pull that into some of these areas around the crown so that they are quite a positive image. That's daring of me, isn't it? And we'll use a touch of water to blend those away. I think we'll add, so again that it doesn't look disjointed, maybe we'll add a bit of gouache down here over the top of the bleach to maybe lessen the impact to touch. And then shall we have a look at it in the overhead camera and see how it's looking as a whole? Yeah, that's looking pretty done. Do I want to change that? No, that would be tidying it up, Ali. Don't tidy it up. Embrace those lovely marks that you spent ages creating. That needs softening a tad. And one of the things I like to do as a final flourish, it's sort of a signature for me, is that I like to go back in with a brush full of, can be any colour, but I think white would be good for this. And let's put a bit of spatter around. This gives it some movement, and for me it stops me faffing about with it, because when that spatter is on, it's very difficult to go back in and add other things. And I think if with the addition of my signature at the bottom, let's go down here, try and write it fairly straight. Let's go back in and put my signature, and we will call that done. So there you have it, my poppy seed head in mixed media based on watercolour technique. Did you enjoy that? I really hope you did. I really hope that even if you don't fancy having a go, I hope that that spirit of experimentation is something that you can take forward into however it is that you express yourself. And don't forget, there are plenty more techniques like this in my book, A Beginner's Guide to Watercolour with Mixed Media. It is packed full of projects and techniques and ways that you can experiment with that lovely stash of stuff that you have at the back of your cupboard. Now, if you're watching this between the 25th of May and the 9th of June 2024, then I will be in the middle of Dorset Art Week's fabulous event where we throw open the doors of our studios here in the county of Dorset and we invite you in. It's got particular significance for me this year because it is my 50th year around the sun, and so I have taken on a project called 50 at 50. So that's 50 paintings in my 50th year, and they will all be available to be seen at my studio or online on my website. Now, the fabulous team at Search Press, if you are watching within those time parameters, have also organised a giveaway of my book. So please keep your eye on the details of this video or on their socials for more information. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honour to share some of my techniques with you. Take lots of care, won't you? And hopefully I will catch up with you very soon. Bye.